Welcome back, you guys, to the Senhieser Company. I am Jesse, and today we are getting to something that I've been meaning to get to for a very long time. This guy, the Virpil Mongoose MT50 CM2 throttle. I've wanted to do a review on the Virpil throttle for a while. The problem is, Virpil is so aggressive at improving upon their designs, and perhaps nowhere more so than their throttle, that every time I buy a throttle, use it for a bit, start to get ready to review the throttle, they announce a new version. That has happened 2 times now. So I think that Virpil has settled on a design that they like, and I think the CM2 Mongoose will be here for a while. I happen to have the first 2 versions of their throttle still, so I am going to show you guys what the first 2 cracks at their throttles were, and then we'll go into what the CM2 changes on those designs, what they've improved, things that I wish they'd kept, and give you guys a once around the world on this thing. This monster right here is the Gen 1 Virpil throttle. It has a ton of buttons on it, a really ergonomic grip. It was an extremely functional throttle. It's heavy. The base is made mostly out of metal. It has quite a smooth travel, and it has a detent in there. I don't know if you guys can hear that, which is something I loved about it. But apparently the detent was something that failed on quite a few units, and so they've decided to take it out in the next version. We'll get to that. Boom. Gen 2 of the Virpil Mongoose throttle. The CM1, if you will. You'll notice very little changed on the base of the throttle. They made this ring black. Pretty much everything else is identical. What did change significantly was the grip. You'll notice that the grip became a much more specialized looking grip. They added a ton of buttons onto the grip, and they also added the index stick, which is something that is very important to a lot of sim pilots, both space and flight sim. There are so many buttons on this grip. It's like there's on the side, underneath. It's actually pretty insane how many buttons they put onto the grip section of the Gen 2. This grip would be incredibly ergonomic if it weren't for all of these buttons on the front that you are basically always trying not to press when you're jockeying the throttle back and forth. If you're doing, if you're maneuvering in dogfights, or you're in a situation where you basically constantly have to make power changes, this particular layout is not ideal in my opinion. Oh, and they took out the detent. So you'll notice you can hear no detent, you can feel no detent. There's no detent. It's kind of a shame. A detent is a pretty important feature on most flight sims, most fighter sims at any rate, and on space sims, it's helpful to have a couple stopping points or a couple of tactile guides to where you are on the throttle. In fighter sims, you've got sometimes 2 detents, one to start the engines and another to stop you from moving into afterburner unintentionally. On space sims, a lot of times they have forward and reverse thrust settings, so it's helpful to have a detent in the center so you can get a feel without looking at the throttle or your engine setting of whether you're actually getting reverse thrust or whether you're still in forward thrust or you've properly zeroed out your engines. So it is kind of a bummer to me that they removed the detent on the Gen 2. If it was constantly breaking for people, I guess I would have preferred that they come up with a design that is more robust as opposed to just removing it altogether. That brings us to Gen 3. You'll notice that it is significantly different in the base section. It's a much smaller footprint. They have removed some of the buttons, but the grip is overall unchanged from the Gen 2. One thing they did do was add some length to the arm, so the throw is just a little bit longer, which is actually a great thing because it will give you more precision in your throttle movements. They did not put a detent back into this throttle, so that's kind of a bummer. It was something I was hoping to see in the third generation. This throttle has adjustable friction, much like the Gen 1 and Gen 2, but it is accessed internally. The overall design of the base of the Gen 3, the CM2 throttle, is part of an overarching plan to add other boxes that have the same footprint, match the base of this throttle, but are button boxes or dial boxes or lever boxes. Universal boxes that will allow you to add more functionality to your sim pit if you don't have enough buttons here already. This thing is going to set you back $375 US. Not what you would call inexpensive. What I will say though is that the throttle is arguably as important as your stick in a flight and space sim. It gives you all kinds of control, and it adds all kinds of tactile functions, adds all kinds of immersive buttonology to your sim pit without having to go crazy building out things. And the sun has fully arrived. Okay, let's get into the features that you're getting with the Virpil throttle. The mechanism it uses is an adjustable friction arm. It gives you the ability to dial up and dial down the friction of the throttle. It is a split throttle, so you've got two throttle arms technically. If you have a sim that takes advantage of that, they lock together if you don't want them to be split. As with most locking split throttles, I wish it did a little bit better job of really securing those two throttle arms together. There's a little bit of play in there. When you've put the lock in place, it will keep them together, but one will lag behind a little bit. In the Gen 3, you have the two primary throttle arm axes. You have a gear or flap lever axis that's programmable. To get the base into that smaller form factor, they also pared back some of the buttons. So now you have 6 push buttons. In the Gen 3, they're a more satisfying, clicky button with more throw, more travel. They're also backlit, so you can change the RGB setting on them, and you can add your own little images into the keycaps of the button. When it comes to switches, they've kept 3 metal switches that are return to center switches, so you press it up and release, it'll go back to center. And then they've introduced a new plastic switch, which in the pictures I at first was skeptical about. Plastic switches seemed like they would feel cheap to me, but in practice they are actually pretty satisfying. They don't feel in any way like they will ever break. They're super strong plastic switches, and the larger surface area on them does make them a little bit easier to flip. So honestly, I think they're an upgrade. They've got a couple of dials that have clicks and infinite turning, so you can really program those to be whatever you want. They've also got a press button built in. And they have kept the mode switch, so you can use the mode switch to either switch between 5 different profiles that you've pre-programmed on this thing, or you can just use it for a 5 position switch on the same profile. It has a locking detachable USB cable, and it has an auxiliary port which will in the future allow you to daisy chain peripherals together, freeing up USB ports on your computer. Up on the grip, you've got that slew stick. You've got the slider. You've got an 8-way hat with push. 3 4-way hats with push. One 2-way hat with push. Two encoder dials, one of them with push. Four momentary push buttons. There's a lot of buttons and dials on the grip. Of course, I love the functionality. I kind of wish you could get a more comfortable grip on the throttle itself when you're really like yanking and banking, jockeying the throttle back and forth. You have to take care not to inadvertently press a button or move a slider, because they're all right there where your fingers are going to be, which is obviously the idea. In that respect, I enjoyed the first generation grip. It gave you a little more surface area to wrap your hand around before having to worry about if your fingers are going to hit the buttons accidentally. Okay, so you guys know I like to give some contrast to give you guys an idea how some products stack up to other products, just to help you understand the strengths and weaknesses of a product that you may not be able to get your hands on before having to make the purchase online. Its closest competitor is probably the Warthog, not just because of its price point, but because of its availability. You usually can track down a Warthog throttle somewhere. The Warthog is also a great quality product. A lot of metal used in it. It's designed to be a replica of the A10 throttle. So what you're going to get is a very specific experience, and it may not translate quite as well to every other thing that you apply it to, meaning space sims, aircraft that are not an A10. Me personally, I'm not that big of a replica guy. It's not that important to me to have the exact grip or stick in my hands that I'm flying, mainly because I do a lot of different flying of fighters and spacecraft, and I just would rather have a stick and a throttle that are practical and usable on all of those platforms, rather than one that is perfect for one of them and just all right for the rest of them. It's not to say you can't use the Warthog for anything, but it is really purpose-built for the A10 experience. The Virpil Mongoose MT50 CM2 throttle is Virpil's third generation in a very short amount of time, and they've refined a lot when it comes to their throttle. The things that you get in this throttle is one that's got a small footprint, a nice long throw. It's got several programmable axes to include a slew stick on the front of it, and it's of very durable construction. Things I would love to have seen with the Virpil throttle, the Gen 3, would be a more ergonomic design to the grip, in the sense that the buttons aren't right where your fingers are trying to gain traction on the grip. Something a little bit more like the Gen 1 grip, in the sense that you don't get to the buttons until you're further down the front of the grip, so you can actually really just grab the thing if all you want to do is move it. It's expensive, but it is technically cheaper than the previous generation throttle, so at least they're moving in the right direction. One con might be that it's not a replica. Again, not important to me, but some people are really looking for that full immersion replica experience when it comes to the cockpit. And finally, I really wish it had detents. I never broke the detents on the Gen 1 throttle, and I loved them. It was really satisfying. It was a click that just felt good, and you could change where the detent was on the throttle, and it really helped to know where your engine position was, whether you're in a space sim or a flight sim. And without it, I just find myself constantly searching to get that zero position on a space sim or that perfect 99% throttle position on a fighter without going into afterburner. I really wish they had a detent in there. All in all, though, I really love the Gen 3 throttle. They've got a good solution with foot pads for desktop mounting solutions. It's got holes for mounting it on a table mount. It is much smaller than the previous versions, so it's easier to fit into your sim pit at home, and it's part of a growing ecosystem of sim pit products that all match each other and will just be extremely good looking and high functioning for your sim pit construction moving forward. I think Virpil's really got a feel for what they want to do with their products at this point, and I would be happy to recommend the VPC Mongoose CM2 throttle to anybody that is looking to get into a throttle in their sim pit. Thanks for coming by the channel, you guys. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate the subs even more. It helps the channel out a ton. We got a ton of really good reviews coming for you, so make sure you check back often. We'll see you next time. Later.